The ex-husband and his mistress went to a party and unexpectedly ran into his stunning ex-wife. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel to receive the best stories firsthand. The town of Belhaven was known for its refinement and exclusivity, and that night the restaurant Le Marchand, one of the most sophisticated in the region, was booked for a gala event. Entrepreneurs, investors, and high society influencers were gathered to celebrate the annual award ceremony for the highlights of the financial sector. Ethan Callaway entered the hall with firm steps, carrying his usual aura of confidence. Tonight's dinner was a golden opportunity to consolidate his image as one of the most influential names in the market. At his side was Celeste Harrington, a young advertising executive who, in recent months, had become his constant companion. Celeste was magnetic, engaging, and loved being in the spotlight. "They'll be talking about us all night," she whispered with a satisfied smile. "I love that." Ethan smiled, adjusting the buttons on his jacket. "Talking about me, you mean?" She laughed and squeezed his arm, feigning irritation, modest as ever. The two were greeted by hosts and photographers, while waiters passed by with trays of champagne. Ethan greeted acquaintances, exchanged calculated words with investors, everything going exactly according to plan. Until, the moment he looked at one of the main tables, his body tensed. She was there. Vivian Hayes. Ethan felt an immediate impact when he saw her. The woman he had left behind, who had once seemed so dependent on him, now occupied that space as if she had always belonged to him. Her navy blue dress emphasized her elegance, and her hair loose in soft waves added a touch of lightness to her striking presence. She wasn't alone. She was chatting engagingly with a group of businessmen, drawing smiles and admiring glances. She seemed unattainable, and for the first time, Ethan realized that he knew absolutely nothing about the woman Vivian had become. "Who's that?" Celeste asked, observing the intense way Ethan stared at the table. It took him a second to answer. "Vivian," he said without taking his eyes off her. "My ex-wife." Celeste raised an eyebrow, assessing the scene. It doesn't look like the divorce shook her up too much. Ethan didn't reply. He knew Celeste was right. Vivian not only looked well, but radiated a kind of security he had never seen before. And then in the middle of the conversations and toasts, Vivian's eyes met his. It was a second of absolute silence inside Ethan's mind. The room was still full of voices and laughter, but he couldn't hear a thing. Vivian held his gaze without hesitation, and with a slight smile raised her glass in a discreet toast. That seemingly simple gesture made something inside Ethan turn around. "Mr. Callaway." The excited voice of one of the evening's organizers drew him back. "How nice of you to come. We're gathering the main guests. Please, come and sit down." Celeste took his hand, leading him, but Ethan could feel Vivian's gaze still burning into his skin. And then the inevitable happened. The chairs were arranged for the first part of the awards ceremony, and to his surprise, or perhaps fate, he and Celeste were taken to exactly the same table as Vivian. The tension was palpable the moment they sat down. Vivian maintained her elegant posture, without showing any discomfort. On the contrary, she seemed slightly amused by the situation. "Ethan," she said, bowing slightly in a casual greeting, "what a surprise to see you here." "Vivian," he replied, forcing a smile, "I had no idea you'd be among the guests." "I imagine not," she said unhurriedly, "but the events committee invited me. I've been collaborating on some strategic projects for the awards." Ethan blinked, surprised. He had no idea that she was involved in such things. "Vivian has always had a flair for strategy," one of the businessmen at the table commented. "Her company is revolutionizing the marketing sector for the financial market." Celeste, until then observant, smiled with a sharp tone. "Oh, so you work in finance too?" Vivian turned to her, maintaining the same serenity. "In a way, yes, but my specialty has always been storytelling. The financial market has many interesting narratives, and I just help shape them in the right way." Ethan pressed his lips together. He knew that game well. Vivian was making it clear that she had built her own path, a path where he was no longer the center. Dinner continued with light conversation, but Ethan was becoming increasingly restless. He tried to concentrate on Celeste, but his mind kept returning to Vivian. The way the others seemed to respect her, the sparkle in her eyes, the lightness with which she spoke. Ethan wondered, since when had she become this woman, and why did he care so much now? As the waiter served the main course, Vivian glanced at Ethan and smiled, a small, almost imperceptible smile, but loaded with a meaning he couldn't decipher. The evening proceeded at a calculated pace, full of rehearsed conversations and smiles of convenience, but Ethan could feel the tension growing by the minute. The dinner that was supposed to be a celebration of achievements had turned into a minefield, and the epicenter was Vivian. She was there, at the same table, but she seemed to belong to a completely different world than he remembered. He watched her discreetly between toasts and speeches, trying to understand what had changed in her. The Vivian of before was always in his shadow, shaping her life around his wishes, waiting for a glance, for the slightest recognition. But the woman sitting in front of him now asked for nothing. On the contrary, it was she who commanded the attention. "You've been acting strange ever since you saw her." Celeste's voice cut through his thoughts. She had returned from the drinks table with 2 glasses of wine. The remark wasn't a question. It was an observation laden with expectation. Ethan took the glass without looking at her. "It's nothing." Celeste tilted her head slightly, assessing the empty response. "Right. And I'm naive enough to believe that." But he didn't reply. His eyes returned to Vivian, who was smiling as she listened to something one of the businessmen said. The twinkle in her eyes was natural, unlike the look she used to give him in the past, a look that waited for something that never came. Flashback. Ethan and Vivian's wedding. At first, everything seemed promising. He was a rising name in the investment world, charismatic and strategic. Vivian, on the other hand, was talented and dreamy, a passionate writer who had aspirations of her own, but who somehow always put his priorities before her own. The first cracks began to appear when she tried to share her ambitions with him. "I got an offer to publish a book," she said one evening, her eyes shining with excitement. Ethan, engrossed in emails on his cell phone, just muttered, "That's great." "Great?" She expected more. "I really want to invest in it." "Maybe take some time to write," he sighed, finally putting down his cell phone. "Vivian, now is not the time for you to get lost in fantasies. Do you have any idea of the stability I'm building for us? What you have is already enough. Enjoy it." That left its mark on her. The marriage became a monologue where he spoke and she listened, where he decided and she molded herself. At first, she tried to be understanding, but then she began to feel invisible. Then came the betrayals. Not overt scandals, but subtle signs. Work nights that became more and more frequent, unknown perfumes on his shirt, smiles exchanged with other women at events. Vivian pretended not to notice until she couldn't ignore it any longer. "You're with someone else, aren't you?" she asked one evening, holding up her wedding ring with trembling fingers. Ethan stared at her, and instead of denying it, he shrugged. "Vivian, you make too much of a drama. Maybe if you were more interesting like them, we wouldn't have to have this conversation." Those words were the last straw. She didn't argue. She just picked up her things and left, leaving behind the woman who sacrificed everything for a man who never saw her value. And he just moved on. Or so he thought. Back to the present. Now, sitting there at the same table as Vivian, Ethan realized that she had done something he never thought she could. She had blossomed without him. "She left you, didn't she?" Celeste asked, her voice carrying something between curiosity and provocation. Ethan forced a smile. "Not exactly. I was the one who decided to move on." Celeste played with the rim of her glass, assessing his expression. "But not before I made her someone who had to reinvent herself in order to survive." Ethan swallowed, but didn't reply. Vivian seemed immune to his presence, as if he were just another guest at the event, and not the man who had shared years of his life with her. This bothered him more than it should have. As he tried to process his feelings, he heard a snippet of Vivian's conversation with a man next to her. "Your last book was amazing, Vivian," the man said, a renowned editor. "You captured the essence of disillusionment and transformation in such a visceral way. I can't wait to see the next one." "Thank you," she replied, smiling. "Pain, when transformed into art, can be liberating." Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. He knew exactly what pain she was talking about. Every line of that book, every metaphor, every page was a literary version of the hell he had put her through. Celeste noticed his discomfort and raised an eyebrow. "She wrote about you, didn't she?" "Maybe," Ethan admitted, trying to keep his posture. "Well, it looks like she's moved on," Celeste said, taking a long sip of her wine. "You should do the same." But he couldn't. Final game. Just when Ethan thought the evening couldn't get any more uncomfortable, Vivian stood up and walked towards him. Her every step was firm, calculated. He felt the eyes around him turning to what was about to happen. She stopped a few centimeters from him, her presence dominating the space. "Ethan," she said, her voice low but sharp as a blade. "I think it's finally time we had a talk." And for the first time in a long time, he felt afraid of what would come next. The evening progressed at the Le Marchand restaurant, but for Ethan Calloway, the luxurious surroundings and polished conversations seemed increasingly suffocating. The award ceremony, which was supposed to be a celebration of his success, now became a psychological game in which he had no control. The reason for this? Vivian Hayes. She was just a few meters away from him at the same table, chatting to the night's top businessman, with an ease he never imagined she would have. She seemed comfortable in that world, as if she had always belonged to it. Ethan tried to ignore her, but it was impossible. Her every laugh made him realize how much more he didn't know about the woman who had once been his wife. Next to him, Celeste Harrington, his girlfriend, was watching the growing tension. "You still haven't answered me," she said, sliding her fingers along the stem of her wine glass. "Why were you so uncomfortable when you saw your ex?" Ethan picked up his own glass and took a sip, choosing his words carefully. "It just took me by surprise." Celeste arched an eyebrow, clearly doubting. "Does that mean you broke up badly?" "Over is not the right word," he said, looking across the table where Vivian was smiling as she answered a question from an investor. "I've moved on." "But has she?" Celeste asked, a sharp tone in her voice. "Because honestly, she doesn't seem the least bit shaken by your presence." Ethan was annoyed by the comment, but kept his expression neutral. Celeste was right. Vivian didn't show any resentment, let alone longing. On the contrary, she seemed absolutely indifferent to him. He looked away, trying to concentrate on dinner, but Vivian's conversation with the businessmen around the table kept drawing his attention. "Your work is changing the market, Vivian," one of the directors praised. "The way you're conducting positioning campaigns for investment funds is impressive. I've never seen someone translate numbers into narrative so well." Vivian smiled modestly. "Thank you. I've always believed that every market has stories to tell. In the world of finance, people talk about statistics, but forget that behind every number there is an ambition, a dream, a calculated risk. I just help turn that into something people want to hear." Ethan frowned. He knew that speech. It was the same way he himself used to talk about investments, but he never imagined that Vivian, of all people, would become such a relevant piece in this game. "So, you've become an expert at selling illusions," he said without thinking. Silence settled briefly on the table. Vivian turned her eyes away from the investor and rested them on Ethan, with a small smile on her lips. "No, Ethan," she replied, her voice calm but sharp. "I've become an expert at telling the truth in a way that people really understand." Tension hung in the air for a few seconds before the other guests started talking again. But Ethan knew that this moment had not gone unnoticed. Celeste noticed his discomfort and leaned in slightly. "Darling," she said, in an almost theatrical tone, "you look tense. Is it strange to see your ex glowing like that?" "Don't be ridiculous," Ethan retorted, but without much firmness. Celeste just smiled. She could sense that there was a lot more to the story than he wanted to admit. Flashback. Ethan and Vivian's wedding. Vivian had always been creative, passionate about stories and storytelling, but during their marriage, her career was never a priority, at least not for Ethan. "I got an offer to work in the marketing sector of a large financial consultancy," she said one evening, excited. "They think I can help the company connect better with the public." Ethan, who was reviewing reports on his laptop screen, just muttered without raising his eyes. "Marketing, that's not a real job in this market." Her enthusiasm waned a little. "It's a real job. just with a different strategy. He finally looked at her. Vivian, why waste time on this? You have a comfortable life. You can focus on more appropriate things. She remained silent. More appropriate. He meant dinners, social events, appearances. But Vivian wanted more than to be the woman next to Ethan Calloway. She wanted to be someone on her own. Over time, Ethan stopped noticing her altogether. He became cold, distant, increasingly obsessed with his own success. And when she realized that he would never see her value, she made the hardest decision of her life. On the night of the divorce, while signing the papers, Vivian stared at him one last time. "One day, Ethan, you'll notice my absence," she said. "But then it will be too late." Ethan didn't reply. At that moment, he thought she would never have the courage to become something without him. He was wrong. Back to the present. And now there she was, proving that not only had she moved on, but that she never needed him to shine. Ethan swirled the rest of the wine in his glass, trying to ignore the weight of the past. But when he looked at Vivian again, he realized that she was getting up from the table. He knew in that instant that a confrontation was inevitable. Vivian walked towards him with the same confidence with which she had walked through the night. Her every step seemed calculated, and Ethan felt his throat go dry. She stopped right in front of him, keeping a calm expression, but with a sharp glint in her eyes. "Ethan," she said, her voice low but firm, "I think it's time we had a talk." And for the first time in a long time, he felt really unprepared. The tension between Ethan and Vivian condensed in the air like electricity before a storm. He tried to keep his composure, but her steady gaze made him feel that his every word would be analyzed, taken apart and reduced to nothing. "Vivian," he began, adjusting his tie with a mechanical gesture, "I don't think this is the best place for this." "No?" She tilted her head, a half-smile playing on her lips. "That's funny because it seems like the perfect place." Celeste, next to him, crossed her arms and maintained an impassive countenance. But Ethan could see that she was absorbing every word. "I would have thought that, after all this time, you would have changed," Vivian continued, her tone sharp but calm. "But apparently the priority is still the same, parading around with flawless women and keeping up appearances." Celeste pressed her lips together, but remained silent. Ethan let out a heavy sigh. "Vivian, let's leave that conversation for another time." She laughed softly, without humor. "Oh yes, of course, because in your world, important conversations can always be postponed, ignored, or replaced by something more convenient." He frowned, feeling his blood run hot. "What do you want from me?" Vivian uncrossed her arms and took a step closer. "Want? Nothing. I just thought you might need to be reminded that not everything can be solved with a bank deposit." Ethan felt a tightening in his stomach. He already knew where this was going. "While you're here celebrating yet another achievement," she continued, her tone unchanged, "your son is wondering why his father never calls. But of course, you must think that paying for the best schools and sending money is enough. After all, it's always easier to buy affection than to show it, isn't it?" The blow was accurate. Celeste looked at Ethan, and this time he saw something different on her face, a doubt that hadn't been there before. "That's not fair, Vivian," Ethan replied, keeping his voice low. "I do what I can." Vivian let out a dry laugh. "You do what you can." She tilted her head slightly. "So tell me, Ethan, what's his best friend's name? What was the last story he told you excitedly? Do you know what makes him wake up in the middle of the night?" His silence was enough for an answer. Vivian then turned to Celeste, with a look that was slightly amused but carried a subtle weight. "I hope you'll be patient. If you go far, you'll need it. The constant outings, the vague excuses, and the messages he never answers become unbearable after a while." "That's enough, Vivian," Ethan cut in, his voice louder than he had intended. A few people nearby cast curious glances his way, but then went back to pretending they hadn't heard anything. Vivian just looked at him, gauging his reaction. "I'm not making a fuss, Ethan," she said softly. "I'm just reminding you that some responsibilities don't disappear just because you choose to ignore them." She then gave a small smile, one that didn't carry any affection, just resignation. "Good luck, Celeste, really." Celeste didn't reply immediately. She picked up her bag slowly, glancing at Ethan, as if she were reconsidering everything she thought she knew about him. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone at the table. Ethan felt a growing discomfort in his chest. Celeste wasn't important to him in the way that Vivian had once been, but her leaving like that, without discussion, without drama, without looking back, hit him in a strange way. But nothing prepared him for what came next. Vivian leaned slightly towards one of the event organizers and whispered something. The man nodded and called for a waiter. A few minutes later, she got up and walked to another table, unhurriedly but with a clear decision. Ethan watched in disbelief. She had asked to change tables. She would rather sit with complete strangers than spend the rest of the evening around him. The restaurant was full of lively conversation, but for Ethan the silence was deafening. He felt exposed, discarded, ignored in a way he had never experienced before. As dinner went on, Ethan realized something he had never experienced before. He was out of place, uncomfortable, as if the world around him had moved on and he had been left behind. He watched Vivian interact with other people, her laughter light, her posture relaxed. She didn't seem to carry any trace of the pain he had caused her. Worse still, she seemed genuinely happy, and that bothered him more than anything else. He noticed how all eyes were on her, how the businessmen and investors respected her opinions. One of the men at the table, someone he considered important, seemed particularly fascinated by Vivian, leaning in slightly as she spoke. Ethan felt his anger boil over. He never thought he would lose control of the telling of his own story. But there he was, reduced to a mere spectator while his ex-wife became the protagonist. He called a waiter and ordered something stronger. The wine was no longer enough. As the evening drew to a close, Ethan found himself leaning against a corner of the restaurant, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He didn't know if it was the alcohol or the weight of Vivian's words, but something inside him felt different, and not in a comfortable way. Vivian, about to leave, cast one last glance in his direction. There was no disdain, no resentment, just indifference. And of all the things Ethan could feel that night, that was the one that destroyed him the most. Dawn was slowly breaking when Ethan finally left the restaurant. The cold city air cut into his skin, but he barely felt it. With his mind clouded by alcohol and Vivian's words, everything seemed distant. He walked to the sidewalk and unlocked the car, but hesitated before opening the door. His head was spinning, and he knew that in that state, driving would be a mistake. With an irritated sigh, he put the key in his pocket and called a cab. When it stopped in front of him, he got in and leaned his head back on the seat, closing his eyes. "Where to, sir?" He hesitated. For the first time in years, he didn't want to go home. The thought of being alone with his thoughts was suffocating, but there was nowhere else to go. 718 Westbrook Avenue, he answered, his voice slurred. The car started, and Ethan stared out of the window, watching the city lights blend into blurs. His mind echoed Vivian's words, repeating them like a cruel mantra. "Your son is wondering why his father never calls." Ethan woke up with a throbbing head and a bitter taste in his mouth. The apartment was completely silent, except for the sound of distant traffic. He sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed his face, trying to shake off the hangover. But the bad feeling didn't just come from the alcohol, it came from something deeper, something he didn't want to name. Vivian had moved on. He knew that now. But what hit him hardest was realizing that, while she was rebuilding her life, he had simply given up on being a father. He got up and walked to the kitchen, pouring himself a strong coffee. But instead of getting ready for the day as he did every morning, he picked up his cell phone and, without thinking too much, typed Vivian Hayes' name into the search engine. There were several interviews and articles about her work in the financial market. Articles praising her innovative approach to strategic marketing. He clicked on one of them, but the words soon became just a background. What really mattered wasn't there. He went back to the search and scrolled some more, until he found something different. A professional page. It was writing articles about the impact of storytelling in the world of finance, sharing insights into how companies could communicate better with investors and customers. It was brilliant, engaging in a way he had never imagined the financial market could be. For some reason he kept scrolling, clicking on links, trying to absorb everything he could about this new version of Vivian. And then, without realizing it, he ended up on a more personal profile. A recent photo caught his eye. Vivian was sitting in a park, and next to her, a boy was smiling, holding a notebook scribbled with colorful drawings. The golden sun illuminated his dark hair and curious eyes. Ethan's heart leapt. He magnified the image, holding his breath. It was his son. A knot tightened in his throat, and he slid his eyes to the caption below the photo. He teaches me every day that true love is not in perfection, but in acceptance. My little world, my amazing boy, my warrior. And then, the sentence that froze him. Autism has brought us challenges, but it has also shown us what really matters. Love always wins. Ethan remained motionless. The coffee cooled in his hand, and his vision blurred for a moment. Autism. He read the caption again, as if his mind was trying to deny the information. His son was autistic, and he never knew, because he never asked. His chest tightened in a way he didn't know. Vivian's words echoed in his head once again. Do you know what makes him wake up in the middle of the night? He didn't know. He never had. And suddenly all the money he had sent, all the checks he had signed, all the schools he had paid for seemed insignificant. He had never been there. He never bothered to get to know his own son. Vivian never stopped him. She never demanded his presence. But she never called to demand anything either. She simply accepted that he chose to stay away. And he realized, with a suffocating tightness in his chest, that he had lost years of his son's life because he had become exactly the man he never wanted to be. The shame came like a wave. Ethan put the phone down on the table and ran his hands over his face. He didn't know what he would do next, but he was sure of one thing. He couldn't go on being that man. Ethan spent the whole day at home thinking about his choices. He could hardly sleep. The next day the sun was streaming through the gaps in the curtains when Ethan opened his eyes, his head throbbing with the weight of the night before. The apartment was silent, but inside, a whirlwind of thoughts continued to spin relentlessly. This time, it wasn't the work that was exhausting him. It wasn't the parties, the contracts, or the business dinners. It was the truth that he had spent years ignoring and which was now staring him in the face mercilessly. He picked up his cell phone and dialed Vivian's number. He hesitated before pressing the call button, knowing that she probably wouldn't answer. And he was right. The call went to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. Obvious, he muttered to himself, letting out a sigh. Then, with no other option, he wrote a message. Vivian, I know I failed as a father. I saw everything yesterday and realized how absent I've been. I don't want to be that man anymore. I don't just want to send money, I want to be there. Please let me see him. He waited for a few minutes, staring at the screen. No reply. He had to do something, now. And so he made a decision. He grabbed his car key and drove to the only place he knew he could find his son. The school where his son went to school he knew. Ethan arrived at the school just before quitting time. The iron gate was open, and some children were already coming out in groups, laughing and chatting. He stood beside the car, his heart beating faster than he'd like to admit. It was ridiculous that he should feel nervous at the sight of his own son. Finally, he spotted Leo. The boy was coming out of the building holding his backpack, his eyes shining as he showed something to a teacher. He was gesticulating excitedly, explaining something in detail. Ethan swallowed. It was the first time in a long time that he had really stopped to watch his son. Leo looked like a mixture of Ethan and Vivian. He had his mother's expressive eyes and his father's tall build. But there was something else about him, something Ethan had never noticed before. The boy had specific movements, a rhythm of his own. As he spoke, he swayed his body slightly and his hands made repetitive gestures, as if following an invisible pattern. Ethan had never noticed, because he had never been close enough to notice. Before he could take a step towards his son, a familiar voice interrupted him. I can't believe you're here. He turned and found Vivian standing a few meters away from him. She was wearing casual clothes, but her posture was firm, her eyes narrowed in a mixture of surprise and caution. I needed to see you, Ethan said, trying to keep his composure. Without warning, without planning. Do you really think that's how it works? Her voice wasn't aggressive, but it carried a weight that he felt straight in his chest. "I know I did everything wrong," he admitted. "But I'm trying to put it right." Vivian crossed her arms. "And you think showing up here all of a sudden solves anything?" Ethan looked at Leo, who was now laughing at something one of his colleagues had said. "No, but it's a start. I called you, I texted you, but you didn't answer." Vivian sighed, massaging her temple. Finally, she looked at her son, who still hadn't noticed them. "I'm not going to stop you from seeing each other," she finally said. "I never have. But you need to understand something, Ethan. Leo can't be treated as a one-off appointment. He has a routine, he has needs that go beyond what you imagine. If you're going to enter his life, it has to be for real." "That's what I want," he replied, his voice firmer than she had expected. Vivian analyzed his every expression, as if trying to detect the truth behind his words. Then she nodded slightly. "Then you can take him home today," she said, "if he wants to go." Ethan felt unexpected relief, but there was still one obstacle. Leo had to want to see him. Vivian made a discreet sign and the boy finally noticed them. When his eyes landed on Ethan, his expression changed. He didn't look excited, but he didn't look scared either. Just uncertain. "Hi, Leo," Ethan said, trying to sound natural. "Hi," the boy replied softly, holding the strap of his backpack. Ethan bent down to meet him. "I thought we could have a hot chocolate, only if you want." Leo looked at Vivian, who just shrugged. It was his decision. After a moment of silence, he finally nodded. "Okay." Ethan let out a discreet sigh. "Great." The two went to a nearby coffee shop. Leo sat with a slightly stiff posture, fiddling with his mug without looking directly at his father. Ethan noticed the boy's hesitation and tried to find a way to break the ice. "So, what do you like most about studying at school?" Leo shrugged. "Math." Ethan was surprised. "Math, huh? That's great. Any particular subject you like better?" Leo finally looked up, suspicious, as if he hadn't expected his father to really be interested. "I like doing math, logic problems, equations." Ethan smiled, leaning forward a little. "Really? When I was a kid, I loved those challenges that seemed impossible at first, but then made sense when you found the pattern." Leo blinked, surprised. "Me too. I like solving difficult problems." The tension at the table eased a little. For the first time, Ethan felt that he had found a point of connection with his son. Leo began to talk more, explaining that he liked mathematical puzzles and how he felt when he finally found the right answer. Ethan listened intently, absorbing every word, because at that moment nothing was more important than that. When the hour passed and Ethan drove to Vivian's house, Leo hesitated before getting out of the car. "Are you going to see me again?" Ethan didn't need to think. "Yes, I promise." Vivian, who was waiting outside, looked at him with an expression that was hard to decipher. "I hope you keep it," was all she said. Ethan just nodded, knowing that this time words wouldn't be enough. After Leo entered the building, Vivian stood still for a moment before turning to Ethan. "That doesn't erase the years you spent away," she said bluntly. "I know," he replied, "and I think about it every moment." Vivian stared at him, trying to gauge whether he was really changing or whether it was just another passing flash of conscience. "I'm not going to make it easy for you," she said, crossing her arms. "If you want to be a father, you'll have to prove it. Not for me, but for him." "I will," Ethan said without hesitation. She was silent for a moment before nodding. "We'll see." She then entered the building, leaving Ethan alone on the sidewalk. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like running away. He finally understood that if he wanted to be part of Leo's life, he would have to build it from scratch. And it didn't matter how long it took, he was willing to try. Ethan stood there for long minutes after Vivian had entered the building with Leo. The cold afternoon wind cut across his face, but he barely felt it. Her words echoed in his mind. "If you want to be a father, you'll have to prove it." He wanted to, but did he know how? The first meeting with Leo had been better than he expected, but it was far from enough. There had been years of distance between them, years of silence, and now, after finally taking the first step, A doubt was throbbing in his mind. What if it's too late? He got into the car and stared at the steering wheel. His reflection in the rearview mirror stared back at him, and for the first time in a long time he didn't like what he saw. The man in the mirror wasn't strong. He wasn't successful. He was a coward. Vivian never asked anything of him. She never called to demand his presence, never begged him to be a father. Because deep down, perhaps she knew what took Ethan so long to admit. He was always the kind of man who took the easy way out. But now there was no way out. The only option was to move on. And the first step was to find out everything he'd lost. Ethan spent the night devouring all of Vivian's social networks. Now that he knew what to look for, every photo, every text, every post seemed like a piece of a puzzle he'd never tried to put together. Leo was on almost all of them, but what really struck him were Vivian's accounts. In a post from 2 years ago, a photo showed Leo holding a school certificate. The caption read, "Today he taught me once again that everyone's time is unique. No matter how difficult it seems, he always finds a way to shine." The comments were full of support. Friends congratulating the boy, praising Vivian for her strength. But Ethan was fixated on one particular response. A woman called Sienna Blake wrote, "His progress is incredible. He's a brilliant boy, but you never had any doubts about that. I wish more parents had your vision." Sienna Blake. The name was not unfamiliar to him. He typed it into Google and within seconds found a professional profile: child therapist, specialist in neurodevelopment and autistic spectrum disorder. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. Vivian had never mentioned that Leo was in therapy. She never said a word about her son's difficulties. Why? The answer was obvious. Because she didn't need him to know. Because he never made a difference. Ethan threw the phone down on the table and wiped his hands across his face. This was unbearable. Knowing that his own son had lived through challenges he had never even imagined. That while he was at business dinners, signing contracts, parading with models, Vivian was struggling alone with her son and still working to be the brilliant professional she is today. How many times must she have looked at her phone and thought about calling him? How many times must she have given up because she knew he wouldn't pick up? He needed to talk to this therapist. He needed to know what he didn't know. But how? If he called Vivian, she would never allow it. He looked at his cell phone again. There was one way, and it would be now. The next morning, Ethan parked his car in front of Sienna Blake's office. The discreet sign on the door read, "Child Development Center, caring for little geniuses." He took a deep breath before entering. The receptionist greeted him with a professional smile. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I really need to speak to Dr. Sienna. My name is Ethan Calloway." The woman hesitated. "What about?" He clenched his jaw. "It's about my son." The receptionist frowned, clearly surprised. "Just a moment." She picked up the phone and made a quick call. After a minute, she hung up and looked at him. "She can see you now." Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He didn't know what he was about to hear, and he didn't know if he was ready for it. But he went in anyway. Sienna Blake was a woman in her 40s, with intelligent eyes and a gentle smile. But the look she threw at Ethan was far from welcoming. "So you finally decided to show up," she said bluntly. Ethan swallowed. I just want to understand better. I want to know about what I've lost." Sienna crossed her hands on the table and stared at him as if trying to decide whether he deserved those answers. Finally, she let out a sigh. "Leo is an exceptional child," she said. "Intelligent, perceptive, and with an incredible capacity for learning. But he's also had difficulties. Many." Ethan remained silent. In the first years of school, he had problems communicating with the other children. Not because he didn't want to, but because the world works differently for him. Loud sounds bother him. Sudden changes of routine can be extremely difficult, but he has learned to cope. Vivian taught him how to deal with it. Ethan looked away. When he was younger, he would spend weeks obsessing over numerical patterns. He saw patterns in everything, in the tiles on the floor, in the street lamps, even in the arrangement of objects in the room. It calmed him down. But if something got out of place, it was as if his world fell apart. Ethan felt a tightness in his throat. He remembered how much he had loved mathematical patterns as a child. Maybe Leo had inherited it from him, but he'd never been around to notice. Vivian brought him here when she realized that he needed help to understand his own emotions. He's always been very independent. But deep down, do you know what hurt him the most? Ethan looked up. Sienna held his gaze. His father's absence. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. "He never asked about me?" he asked, his voice breaking. Sienna sighed. "At first, yes, but then—" He just stopped. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. Leo stopped asking, because he accepted that his father would never be there. The pain Ethan felt at that moment was indescribable. When he finally managed to speak, his voice came out almost as a whisper. "I want to change that, but I don't know where to start." Sienna watched him for a few seconds before replying. "Then start by being constant. Leo doesn't need promises, he needs actions." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility fall on him like never before. He had a lot to fix, and no amount of time in the world would be enough to make up for everything he'd lost. As he left the office, Ethan picked up his cell phone and saw a notification. A message from Vivian. "We need to talk. Alone." He felt his stomach turn. Was this a good sign? Or a warning that she was about to cut off any chance of closeness? Whatever it was, he was about to find out. Since that night in the restaurant, his life had been turned upside down. Everything that had once seemed important, his reputation, his business, the lavish dinners, was now just noise in the background. He had only one goal: Leo. And for the first time, he felt he was doing something right. Celeste never showed up again. No phone call, no message. No attempt to take back whatever it was they had. Deep down, Ethan knew he didn't need an explanation. She realized the obvious before he even admitted it to himself. He no longer had room for her in the life he was trying to rebuild. Now, there was only Leo. And it was for him that Ethan walked through that cafeteria every day, waiting anxiously for school to let out. It was for him that he spent nights researching autism, trying to understand more about his own son. It was for him that every day she tried to become a man worth having around. But after everything, was Vivian ready to accept him in this new role? The first few meetings with Leo were cautious. The boy was too intelligent to trust him right away. In the first few days, Ethan noticed that Leo didn't like sudden changes. If he said he would pick up his son at 3, he had to be there at 3 sharp. 1 minute late and Leo would get restless and shut down. Ethan learned this the hard way. One afternoon, when he was 5 minutes late, he found Leo with his arms crossed, staring at the sidewalk. "You said 3 hours, the boy said, without anger, but with an almost palpable disappointment. Ethan felt like a dead weight falling off a cliff. "I know, man, traffic, it won't happen again." Leo just nodded and climbed into the car. It was silent for the rest of the journey. And that's how Ethan realized something. Words meant nothing to Leo. It was consistency that mattered. Then he started showing up, every day, at exactly 3 o'clock, and little by little something incredible happened. Leo began to wait for him. At first, he pretended not to care. But one day, when Ethan showed up at the gate, he saw his son peeking through the classroom window before the bell even rang. Ethan smiled. It was working. The boy started talking more. Little details at first, about school, about how one of his classmates didn't understand how to solve an algebra equation, and he had to explain. Ethan took every opportunity to praise him. "That's amazing, Leo. You have a way of looking at numbers that not many people have." The boy just shrugged, but Ethan saw it, saw the small smile he tried to hide, and then came the biggest victory of all. One afternoon, while they were sitting in the cafeteria, Leo took out a napkin and started scribbling down numbers. Ethan watched for a moment before asking, "What are you doing?" "It's a number pattern," Leo said, concentrating. Ethan smiled. "Can I try to solve it?" Leo looked at him in surprise. It was the first time anyone had shown a genuine interest in what fascinated him so much. "You can try," he said, pushing his napkin away. And that's how they spent the whole afternoon, creating mathematical challenges for each other, laughing, having fun, connecting. And from afar, Vivian watched it all. She saw the way Leo looked at Ethan now. the way the boy no longer seemed tense around his father, and that moved her. Because, try as she might, she couldn't deny it. Ethan was changing. But was that enough? Ethan's phone vibrated as he parked his car in front of the school. Vivian. Today, 7 in the evening, my place. We need to talk. Ethan felt his stomach turn. He knew it would happen. But was it to thank him for his efforts or to say that, despite everything, he still didn't trust him? So he went. When he got there, she started talking. I heard you went to see Leo's therapist, she began bluntly. Ethan held his breath. So she knew. She crossed her arms, staring at him with that analytical look he knew so well. And I want to know why. Why did you think you had to go after her instead of asking me? Ethan felt a slight discomfort. He didn't want Vivian to think he was trying to get around her, but the truth was, he needed to hear it from an outsider. I wanted to understand without interference, he said sincerely. I wanted to know what Leo had been through all these years. And I thought that if I asked you directly, it would be unfair. I forced you to carry this weight alone. I didn't want to make you relive it just to catch up. Vivian was silent for a moment. She looked away, and for the first time, Ethan saw something there. It wasn't anger. It wasn't coldness. It was tiredness. She had spent years dealing with everything on her own, and now, for the first time, someone wanted to share the burden with her. I don't know what to say, she admitted, sighing, but I can see that Leo is happy, and that, for me, is what matters most. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. She was being honest. She wasn't saying it as a provocation, but as a realization. So he asked hesitantly, Does that mean you trust me? Vivian took a deep breath before answering. It means that I want to. Ethan nodded, accepting the answer. It was more than he had expected. But then Vivian said something he definitely wasn't expecting. I wanted to ask you something. Go ahead. If I let you take Leo to spend the weekend with you, would you accept? Ethan froze. Are you serious? Vivian nodded. You've been there, and I know that Leo is starting to get attached to you. He talks about you when he comes home. He says he likes solving challenges with you. He's happy, and I think the time has come for you to spend more time together. Ethan didn't know what to say. He wanted this. He wanted it more than anything. But then she continued. Besides, I'd also like to have some time off for myself. That's when Ethan felt an uncomfortable twinge in his chest. Free time? He repeated, trying to keep his expression neutral. Vivian nodded naturally. Yes, I think it's been a while since I've had some time to myself. To go out, to take a breather from the routine. Ethan swallowed. He wanted to ask. He wanted to demand answers. What did she want this free time for? To meet someone, to go on a date? But she couldn't do that. She didn't have the right. And yet jealousy burned inside him. Vivian noticed the subtle change in his face. But she didn't say anything. She just waited. And then, after a heavy silence, Ethan took a deep breath and nodded. I accept. Vivian smiled slightly. Good. Then we'll make arrangements later. Can it be this weekend? Of course. She nodded and took a small step backwards, ending the conversation. I'll see you tomorrow, then. See you. Ethan's thoughts were in chaos. On the one hand, he was finally getting what he wanted. More time with Leo. Vivian's trust. But on the other, there was a new doubt growing inside him. Was Vivian making space for him? Or was she just moving on, with someone else? He didn't know, and that thought destroyed him more than he'd like to admit. Ethan drove home, still feeling the effect of the conversation. He had achieved something he hadn't thought possible a few weeks ago. Leo would spend the weekend with him. But for some reason, all he could think about was, who was taking up Vivian's free time? If he really was changing, then he also needed to prepare himself for what came next, because if there was one thing he wasn't yet ready to face, it was the thought of losing Vivian forever. Friday dawned sunny, and Ethan could feel his heart racing as he parked his car in front of Vivian's building. Leo would be spending the weekend with him. For the first time. Vivian opened the door and Leo appeared right behind, holding a small backpack. Ready? Ethan asked, trying to sound calm but feeling the weight of the moment. Leo nodded. Yeah. It was simple, no hesitation. This time, Leo wanted to go. Vivian looked at Ethan and said, "He's already had breakfast, but take a coat. Sometimes he gets cold at night and doesn't say anything." "That's fine," Ethan assured her. There was a brief exchange of glances, something unspoken between them. But neither of them broke the silence, and then Leo got into the car and drove off with Ethan. At first, Ethan thought Leo would find it strange to spend so much time away from his routine with his mother. But, to his surprise, the boy adapted quickly. They set up math challenges on the whiteboard in the living room. They made pizza together. They watched a documentary about great minds in science. On the second night, Leo took a book from the shelf and handed it to Ethan. "Can you read it to me?" Ethan froze for a moment. He had never read to his son before. But he took a deep breath, opened the book, and began. Leo sat next to him, listening intently, his eyes fixed on the words. And at that moment, Ethan realized how much that small gesture meant. Leo was comfortable. Leo trusted him. And that was all that mattered. Meanwhile, Vivian took advantage of the silence in the house to do something she hadn't done for a long time. Think about herself. She went out to dinner with her friends, laughed without worrying, drank a glass of wine without having to worry about schedules. She also finished an important project that she had been putting off for weeks. And for the first time, she realized how good it was to have some time to herself, how necessary it was. On Sunday afternoon, Ethan took Leo back. The boy got out of the car and, before getting in, looked at his father. "It was nice," he said simply. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a casual phrase, but Ethan knew how much weight it carried. "Do you want to do it again?" he asked, holding his breath. Leo thought for a moment and then gave a small smile. "Yes." Ethan let out a slow breath. Vivian appeared in the doorway and looked at her son. "Did you have fun?" "Yes," Leo repeated. And he went into the house. Vivian and Ethan stood there for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you for doing things the right way." Ethan just nodded. There was nothing more to say. And as the door closed, he realized that for the first time he wasn't afraid of what would come next. The future was still uncertain. But now he knew he was on the right track. Now it's up to you. What do you think should happen next? Can Vivian and Ethan rebuild something together to bring the family back together? Or should Vivian move on and no longer trust Ethan as a husband, only as the father of her child? Comment below. Family. If you think they should stay together. Move on. If she shouldn't give him a chance. Leave your opinion in the comments. Leave your like and subscribe to support our channel. See you in the next video. In the previous video, Ethan arrived at an event with his young girlfriend, Celeste, but was surprised by the presence of his ex-wife, Vivian, now more beautiful and successful than ever. The impact was even greater when he discovered that his son, Leo, had autism, and that for years he had been absent, thinking that money was enough. Determined to change, Ethan began to rebuild the bond with the boy, and for the first time, Vivian allowed Leo to spend a weekend with him. Meanwhile, Vivian enjoyed her time alone, and now Ethan wonders, did she just want a moment to herself, or has she moved on? Ethan entered the apartment and closed the door behind him. The silence enveloped him in a suffocating way. For years he'd come home late, exhausted but satisfied with his life. A drink, a hot shower, and the next day he would follow his usual routine between meetings and women who came in and out of his life without leaving any real mark. But now everything seemed cold, impersonal. He threw his keys on the table and ran a hand over his face. It wasn't just tiredness. It was the feeling that for the first time, his life no longer revolved around contracts, dinners, and unbridled ambition. For the first time, he felt he had something bigger to rebuild. He sat down on the sofa and closed his eyes. And then the memories came like an old movie, projected into his mind without permission. In the beginning, everything with Vivian had seemed perfect. He remembered the first time he saw her, how he felt challenged by her poise, by her intelligence. While other women did everything they could to impress him, Vivian seemed oblivious to his rehearsed charm. She made him laugh, she made him feel seen, and he loved her. But not enough. At the time, he believed that success meant being admired. That a real man was one who commanded respect, who made everyone around him want to be like him. And in the midst of this illusion, he neglected her. Vivian would wait up for him on nights when he said he was working late. She would text him to ask if he was coming back. He, on the other end, would reply with empty phrases. Just a little longer. I'm leaving. It's important for business. But the truth was that he liked the attention. He liked being the man everyone wanted to meet. He liked seeing women look at him with admiration. He liked the feeling of power. And in the process, he pushed Vivian away. First there were the fights. She would say that she missed him, that she wanted more from him. He retorted that she didn't understand how things worked. Then came the silences. The nights when he came home late and she was already asleep. The days when they barely spoke. Until finally the worst part came, the moment when she stopped caring. She remembered one particular evening. Vivian had prepared a special dinner, something simple but lovingly made. He said he would be on time, but he didn't. When he finally entered the house, he found the table still set, but the food already cold. Vivian was sitting on the sofa, staring at the turned-off television. He tried to explain, but she just smiled, an empty smile, and said, "It's okay." And that was the last time she really waited for him. Now sitting on that sofa, Ethan felt the crushing weight of every mistake he had ever made. For years he thought he could just move on, that relationships were disposable. But now, watching Vivian flourish without him, realizing that Leo had lived for years without his presence, he understood what he had really lost. And the worst thing was that it might already be too late. Vivian was different. Not just more confident, but more fulfilled. He could see it in the sparkle in her eyes, in the assured tone of her voice. She didn't need him anymore. And then, the thought he had been trying to avoid finally hit him hard. What if there was another man? Vivian had asked for some time alone, but what if that time was for someone else? Who wouldn't want to be by her side? A beautiful, successful, intelligent, independent woman. He knew that if it weren't for the man who had destroyed his marriage, he would be exactly where anyone else would want to be, by her side. He felt a pang of jealousy, an irrational fear that, while he was struggling to rebuild his relationship with Leo, someone else was already filling the space he had left. But did he have the right to feel that way, after everything he'd done? If Vivian was with someone, he would have to accept it, but not without fighting for her first. He picked up his cell phone, opened the conversation with Vivian and stared at the screen. He wanted to send her a message. He wanted to ask where she'd been at the weekend. He wanted to know if anyone was there. But he couldn't. If he really wanted Vivian back, he had to do it the right way, with patience, with constancy, showing her that he was no longer the man she had to leave behind. With a heavy sigh, Ethan locked the screen of his cell phone and threw it on the table. If he wanted Vivian back, he couldn't just say that, he had to prove it. And for the first time in his life, he was willing to wait. Ethan spent the next few days immersed in a routine that, for the first time, didn't involve endless meetings, fancy dinners, or empty nights with women he would forget the next morning. His focus was just one: Leo. Every afternoon, at exactly 3 o'clock, he was at the school gate waiting for his son. Without fail, no delays. At first, Leo still looked uncertain, as if he was expecting Ethan to disappear again at any moment. But little by little, the look on the boy's face began to change. On Wednesday, as they were leaving school, Leo stopped beside the car and looked at his father. "Are you always coming?" The question took Ethan by surprise. He bent down to meet his son's gaze. "Always," he replied, with more conviction than ever. Leo just nodded, as if he were testing those words, seeing if he could believe them. That night, lying in bed, Ethan realized that something inside him had changed. For the first time, he wanted someone to believe in him, not for what he had, but for what he was capable of offering. And that's where things got complicated, because no matter how hard he tried to rebuild his relationship with Leo, one doubt wouldn't leave him alone. Vivian. She didn't seem like the same woman he'd left behind. And if he was honest with himself, that was the part that terrified him the most. What if she really had moved on? The thought consumed him like a slow poison. He found himself analyzing the smallest details. The moments when she smiled into the phone, the days when she seemed more distracted, the way her posture had changed. And then there was that weekend, the first time she had asked to be left alone. Ethan knew he shouldn't, but he opened Instagram and typed Vivian's name into the search. Her page was discreet, without many personal posts, but he found some recent photos, a glass of wine on an elegant table, an open book next to a cup of coffee, a view of the city lit up at night. Nothing revealing. Nothing that pointed to someone else. But that's what made him even more uneasy. What if she was hiding something? He dropped his cell phone on the bed and closed his eyes, angry with himself. He couldn't act like an insecure man. If Vivian was with someone else, he had no right to question it, but damn it, it was killing him inside. The next day, Ethan decided to do something different. When Leo got into the car, he asked, "Do you mind if I come with you to your therapy today?" Leo blinked a few times, clearly taken aback. "Do you want to go?" "Yes, if you think it's cool." The boy hesitated for a moment. Then he shrugged. "Okay." Ethan felt his chest relax. He knew that, for Leo, this meant more than the boy let on. At the office, Sienna, the therapist, greeted them with a smile, but her expression changed when she saw Ethan. "So, you've come," she said, crossing her arms. "I want to understand you better," he replied. "I want to know how I can help." She studied his face for a moment before nodding. "Then sit back and watch. Today, Leo is going to show me what he learned in the last session." Ethan stood to the side, watching as his son solved challenges, talked about number patterns and sometimes remained silent for long minutes before responding. He began to notice small details, the way Leo avoided eye contact when he was anxious, how he moved his fingers repetitively over his leg when he was trying to organize his thoughts. How had he never noticed this before? When the session was over, Sienna called him in for a chat. "It was important that you came today," she said. "But Leo needs consistency. He needs to know that you're not going away again." Ethan nodded. "I know, and I won't." That night, as he drove home, he found himself thinking about Vivian, how she dealt with everything on her own, how many times she felt like calling him and gave up. He needed to see her. When he parked in front of the building, he hesitated before getting out of the car. She took a deep breath and climbed the stairs to her apartment. He knocked on the door. It opened a few seconds later. "You're here late," she said, frowning. "I wanted to talk to you." Vivian crossed her arms, appraising him. "What about?" Ethan stared at her for a moment. "About how Leo's therapy went today," he said, watching her reaction. Vivian blinked in surprise. "Oh yes, I already talked to Dr. Sienna and she told me everything." "All right then." She was silent for a moment. Then she gave him a small smile, a sincere smile he hadn't seen for a long time. "Thank you for that," she said. Ethan felt something warm up inside him, but before he could say anything, he heard a sound coming from inside the apartment. A male laugh. His chest instantly froze. Vivian noticed the change in his expression and sighed. "Ethan." He took a step back. "Do you have someone?" Vivian was silent for a long moment. Then he answered, "Does it matter?" Ethan's stomach churned. He wanted to shout that it did, that it mattered, that it was destroying him inside. But he couldn't, not now. "I'll see you tomorrow," was all he managed to say before turning his back and walking away. His heart was pounding as he walked down the stairs. The sense of loss was unbearable. What if he had arrived too late? He needed to know the truth, and he was willing to find out, whatever the cost. Ethan entered the house and closed the door tightly, as if to stop the flood of thoughts that tormented him. He threw his keys on the table and sank onto the sofa, running his hands through his hair. The male laughter he had heard in Vivian's house still echoed in his mind, mixed with the question that was eating him up inside. Does she have someone? The idea seemed absurd, or maybe it wasn't. Vivian was beautiful, intelligent, and independent. Why shouldn't she? But that wasn't all. Did this man already know Leo? That was the part that destroyed him. The possibility of another man coming into his son's life, taking up the space he was supposed to fill. What if this guy wanted to be a father figure to Leo? Ethan felt his stomach turn. He never thought that one day he would have to deal with this possibility, but there it was, crushing his chest like an unbearable weight. He picked up his cell phone and opened Vivian's contact. His fingers hovered over the keypad. But what would he say? "Who was at your house yesterday?" No. That would sound pathetic. He blocked the phone and threw himself on the sofa, trying to push the thought away. But that night, sleep was impossible. The next morning, Ethan tried to concentrate on his work, but his mind was far away. In the office, his assistants talked about contracts, investments, and meetings, but nothing seemed important. He needed answers. When he left to pick Leo up from school, he made a decision. He would ask his son, in a casual way, without sounding desperate. As he drove, his mind formulated the right approach. If Leo knew something, would he tell him? On the way home, Ethan sniffed, trying to sound nonchalant. "So, Leo, how was the weekend with your mum?" "It was nice," the boy replied absent-mindedly, looking out of the window. "Did you do anything different?" Leo thought for a moment. "She went out for a while, but I stayed with Aunt Laura." Ethan felt his heart race. "She did." Leo just shrugged and started talking about a new game he'd learned at school. He completely changed the subject. It made Ethan's heart freeze. He turned away. Leo never shied away from simple questions. Had Vivian taught him not to tell certain things? The doubt became unbearable. When they arrived at the building, Ethan got out of the car and went to take Leo to the entrance of the apartment. But something stopped him. There was a men's sandal on the front door. Ethan's chest tightened, as if something had been ripped out of it. It was big, very big. There was no doubt about it. There was another man there. Ethan felt the world spin. He stood still, just staring at the shoes, as if they were a death sentence. Leo had already run into the apartment. Ethan wanted to see him come in, wanted to say something to Vivian, but he couldn't. His body moved on its own. He turned his back and walked back to his car, feeling completely defeated. Vivian appeared at the door. "What's up, Ethan?" But he was already inside the car, closing the door. She frowned strangely. He always waited to say goodbye to Leo, but this time he left without saying anything. Intrigued, she walked over to the living room window, and then she saw him. Ethan was in the car, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his gaze fixed on some point. His chest was rising and falling rapidly, as if he was suffocating. And then, before she could understand what was happening, she saw him run his hands over his face. He was crying. Vivian felt something stir inside her, but she didn't allow herself to go any deeper. She just turned away from the window and went back inside. She had work to do. The next day, Ethan still felt the weight of that discovery. He could barely concentrate, and to make matters worse, he had an appointment right when he was due to pick Leo up from school and take him to therapy. For a moment, he hesitated. Maybe it would be better to cancel with Leo and focus on work. But then he remembered something Sienna had said. Leo needs consistency, not empty promises. He couldn't go wrong again. He picked up the phone and called his assistant. "Reschedule the meeting for another day. Mr. Calloway, this contract is important. I know, but my son is more." And he hung up. At 3 o'clock, Ethan was at the school gate. Leo saw him and smiled slightly before getting into his car. After therapy, Ethan drove him home, but this time he didn't want to go upstairs. He didn't want to see if that man was still there. So when they arrived at the building, he stayed in the car. Vivian, realizing he wasn't coming up, went down to get Leo. She walked to the car, and when Ethan saw her approaching, he felt his heart skip a beat. She looked beautiful. Her loose hair fell over her shoulders, and her confident posture reminded him of the woman he had known years ago. But there was something different about her, something that made his chest tighten. As she helped Leo out of the car, Ethan noticed that Vivian was holding her cell phone in one hand, and between one gesture and the next, she glanced discreetly at the screen. And then something broke inside him, because every time she read a message, a small smile appeared on her lips. A slight smile, almost imperceptible, but Ethan saw it, and that was enough to destroy any hope he still had. He felt his blood run cold. She was talking to someone. Ethan stood motionless, his heart racing, watching Vivian take Leo by the hand and walk back to the building. Her every step felt like a blow against him. The truth was there. She had already moved on. Ethan gripped the steering wheel so hard that his fingers turned white. He needed to know. Who was the man in Vivian's life? And what did he mean to Leo? He couldn't stay in the dark, and he wouldn't. One way or another, he would find out the truth. The weekend was coming, and Ethan was already preparing to pick Leo up. But this time, there was something different in the air. It was another weekend he would spend with his son, but the first after his suspicion that Vivian had someone. He couldn't stop thinking. Did Vivian have a boyfriend? If so, was this man already a part of Leo's life? The thought of another man occupying a space that should be his was consuming him. As he drove to pick up his son from school, Ethan tried to rationalize his feelings. Vivian had the right to move on. He knew that, but knowing and accepting were completely different things. When Leo got into the car, Ethan decided that he didn't want to spend the weekend in that town. He needed some time away from that suffocating environment. "Leo, how about a little trip?" The boy looked at him, curious. "Where to?" "Surprise," Ethan replied, trying to sound cheerful. And so he hit the road to a neighboring town. The destination? A remote hotel surrounded by nature, far from anything that could remind him of Vivian and her paranoia. The hotel was a refuge, surrounded by huge trees, with a crystal-clear lake and a path that led to a hidden waterfall. It was the kind of place Ethan would never have chosen before, but now it made perfect sense. Leo was enchanted from the first moment. His eyes sparkled as he watched the birds, the fish in the lake and the starry sky. Ethan realized something. Being there, with Leo, made him feel something he hadn't felt for years. Peace. The hours passed quickly. They walked along the trail, swam in the lake, and for the first time, Ethan found himself genuinely disconnected from the world he had always valued. No events, no lavish dinners, no business calls. Just him and his son. That evening, Leo took out a notebook and began scribbling numbers, creating mathematical patterns. Ethan watched with a smile. "Is that a challenge for me?" Leo hesitated, then nodded. Ethan picked up a pen and started solving. This time, it wasn't just a game. It was a moment between father and son. Sunday came too quickly. In a few hours they would be going home. In the middle of the afternoon, Ethan's phone vibrated. Vivian. He picked up the phone, took a deep breath, and answered. "Hi. Hi, how was your weekend?" "Great. Leo loved it," Ethan replied. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then she said something that made his stomach turn. "I'm near your house with some people. Can I stop by and pick up Leo?" Ethan was speechless for a moment. People, that was it. She was with him. She was coming with her boyfriend. Ethan tried to keep his tone neutral. "Of course. Let me know when you're coming." "Okay. I'll call you in a bit." The call ended, but the knot in Ethan's chest only grew. This was it. He would finally have to face the truth. Vivian would move on, with another man, and all he could do was accept it. Hours later, when they finally arrived back in the city, Ethan's cell phone vibrated again. "Vivian." "We're at the door." Ethan felt his body freeze. This was it. He stood up slowly, feeling the weight of that walk to the door. Before leaving, he glanced at the window. And then he saw it. In the car parked in front, there was a man at the wheel. Vivian was in the back seat. Ethan's heart stopped. The blood drained from his face. It was real. She was with someone else. And now he would have to face his greatest fear. Time seemed to stop. Ethan stood there staring at the car. His heart was pounding so hard that he could hardly breathe. Vivian was sitting in the back seat, and a man was behind the wheel. His chest tightened. He could taste the bitterness of defeat before he had even confirmed what he feared. He was about to lose Vivian. Swallowing dryly, he took a few steps towards the vehicle, forcing himself to stand firm, as if it didn't affect him. But it did. Every fiber of his being burned with jealousy, regret, and frustration. Before he could process anything, Leo opened the car door and jumped towards his mother. "Mom, the weekend was amazing." Vivian smiled when she saw her son so excited. She grabbed him to hug him. "Was it? Tell me all about it." Ethan watched the scene, his chest still tight, but was soon pulled out of his thoughts when he heard the driver's door opening. A deep, familiar voice rang out. "Great Ethan, miss you, my dear." Ethan blinked, confused. He knew that voice. When his eyes finally focused on the man in front of him, everything made sense. It was Charles, his ex-brother-in-law, Vivian's older brother. The heaviness in his chest disappeared almost instantly. It wasn't a boyfriend, it was Charles, the sandal on the door, the laughter inside the apartment, the man Vivian was spending time with. It was just her brother. Ethan had to stop himself from laughing with relief. He had spent days tormented by an idea that never existed. "Charles, my God, what a long time," Ethan said, now really surprised and happy. The two hugged each other tightly, a genuine energy in the encounter. Charles had always been a nice guy. They used to get on very well before the divorce. Charles tapped Ethan on the shoulder. "Vivian told me you've been spending more time with Leo. Man, I don't even know what to say. That's incredible." Ethan looked at Vivian, who kept a wary eye on him, but didn't interfere in the conversation. "I'm trying to make up for lost time," Ethan admitted bluntly. Charles nodded. "Well, the important thing is to be here now." Leo looked excitedly at the two of them. "Uncle Charles came to visit. He's living with Mom for a few days." Vivian smiled slightly. "He's spending some time with me. He had some problems with his marriage and needed a place to think." Ethan absorbed the information. So that was it. All those days of paranoia, the assumptions, the jealousy, all based on a misunderstanding. He almost sighed with relief. Almost. Because despite everything, he knew that it didn't change the fact that Vivian could move on at any moment. And if that happened, he needed to be ready to deal with it. But right now he just wanted to enjoy the feeling of relief. When Charles and Vivian said they needed to go, Ethan had an idea. "Why don't you guys come over for dinner tomorrow?" he suggested, trying to sound casual. Vivian raised an eyebrow in surprise. Charles smiled. "That would be great. What do you think, Viv?" Vivian hesitated for a moment. She looked at Leo, who was watching her expectantly, and sighed. "All right, we can go." Leo's face lit up. "Are you having dinner together? All of us?" Ethan smiled. "Yes, champ. All of us." Leo jumped for joy, clearly excited by the idea. Vivian just nodded. "See you tomorrow, then." Ethan stood there watching the car drive away, and for the first time in a long time he felt hope. Now that he knew the truth, he was sure he could win his family back. He had already proved that he loved Leo. Now he had to prove to Vivian that he deserved a second chance too, and this time he wouldn't make the same mistakes. The morning of the next day dawned with a clear sky and bright sunshine, but Ethan felt as if a storm was about to rage inside him. He got up early, unable to sleep properly. Dinner that night wasn't just a meal, it was a test. He had already won Leo over. His son was now waiting for him outside school, texting him about the day, and even asking to spend more time with him. But Vivian was still a mystery. There were moments when he felt that she was softening, that perhaps there was still something there between them. But then came her cautious gaze, the invisible barriers that kept him at a safe distance. He couldn't rush her, but he could prove that he was willing to fight. With that in mind, he spent the day organizing every detail of the dinner. He asked his housekeeper to prepare an impeccable menu, with Vivian and Leo's favorite dishes. He chose the best wine, thought about the lighting and the light soundtrack in the background. No exaggeration. He wanted the evening to be natural, cozy. He wanted Vivian to feel at home again. When he picked Leo up from school, he noticed that the boy was restless in the back seat. "Looking forward to today?" Ethan asked. Leo shook his head in the affirmative. "It's going to be nice. I've never seen Mom and you together like this. Just us. Like a family." Those words hit Ethan hard in the chest. A family. That's what he wanted. "It's going to be a special night," Ethan promised, lightly squeezing his son's shoulder. They made their way to the mansion, where they spent the afternoon together. Ethan showed Leo every detail he had prepared for dinner, and the boy seemed overjoyed. When the clock struck 7:30, the doorbell rang. Ethan took a deep breath before opening the door. And then there she was, Vivian, dazzling. She wore a blue dress that highlighted her golden skin. Her loose hair fell in soft waves, and her delicate perfume hit Ethan, Before he could even say anything, he remained silent, just watching her. Charles laughed beside her, crossing his arms. "Are you going to let her in, or are you going to keep staring like that, brother?" Ethan blinked, feeling his face heat up. Vivian laughed lightly. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night. You look amazing." Vivian thanked him but looked away quickly, not wanting to give him the victory of seeing how much his words affected her. They went inside, and the evening began. Dinner was light and relaxed. Charles had a talent for turning any conversation into something funny. Leo laughed at his uncle's jokes, and Vivian seemed relaxed. Ethan enjoyed every second. For a moment, they really did feel like a family again. But he wanted more. After dinner, Leo called Charles to show him the new bedroom. And then Ethan and Vivian were alone. The silence between them was heavy. Vivian was the first to speak. "I have to admit, Ethan, I'm surprised. You really do look different." He held her gaze. "Because I am different, Vivian." She sighed, crossing her arms. "What do you think has changed?" Ethan took a deep breath. "I've realized what I've lost." He looked directly at her. "And I realized that I can still get it back, if you let me." Vivian opened her mouth to reply, but he held up his hand, asking her to wait. "I'm not pressuring you. You can have as much time as you need. I just want you to know that I'm here, that I'm going to stay here. No matter how long it takes, I'm going to fight for us." Vivian felt her heart race. She wanted to resist, she wanted to protect herself. But Ethan was being sincere. She'd never seen him like this before. Before she could reply, Leo and Charles came back into the room, laughing about something. Vivian pulled away slightly. Ethan understood. The conversation wasn't over. But it wasn't time to end it yet. Before they left, Vivian wanted to see Leo's room. When she entered, she was surprised. There were shelves organized with Leo's favorite books and games, a mural with drawings and mathematical challenges. The space had been designed for her son. "It was all Leo's idea," Ethan explained proudly. "He said he wanted his own corner in here." Leo snuggled into bed, picking up one of the challenge books. Vivian ran her hand over the mural, absorbing every detail. She looked at Ethan. "You really did it." Ethan nodded. "I want him to know that he'll always have a home with me. That I'm here." She didn't answer. She just nodded, feeling something grow inside her. In parting, Ethan walked to the car with them. When Leo and Charles got in, Vivian turned to Ethan to say goodbye. It was a natural gesture, but then Ethan did something that took her by surprise. He pulled her into a hug. Vivian froze. For an instant, she felt like time was going backwards. The smell of him, the warmth of his body, the way he wrapped his arms around her. And worse, she liked it. Her heart leapt. She closed her eyes, absorbing the moment. But then reason spoke louder. She pulled away. Ethan stared at her intensely. "Good night, Vivian." "Good night, Ethan." She got into the car, trying to ignore the whirlwind inside her. At home, Charles noticed that Vivian was different. "Okay, go ahead. What's going on in your head?" Vivian hesitated. "I still love Ethan." The confession came out without her realizing it. Charles smiled slightly. "You always have, Vivian." She ran a hand over her face. "But what if he changes again? What if I give it a chance and end up getting hurt?" Charles picked up a glass of water and leaned against the counter. "Look, no one can guarantee the future, but you know what I've learned. You only regret what you don't try." Vivian bit her lip. "I know he made a mistake, but I also know that no one loves this family like he does." Charles nodded. "The woman builds the home, Vivian. If you still have feelings, fight for them. Don't let fear define your story," Vivian sighed. "I just wish someone would say that to my wife too," Charles joked, trying to lighten the load of the conversation. Vivian smiled, but inside she was still confused. When she entered the bedroom, she closed the door and sat down on the bed. Everything inside her was in chaos. Looking at her cell phone, she saw a message from Ethan. "Good night, Vivian. Sleep well." Her heart leapt. She stared at the screen for long seconds, hesitating. Then she typed a single reply. "Good night, Ethan." When she turned off the light, she realized that for the first time in a long time, her heart wasn't set. Should she move on, or give love another chance? The next day, the sun was streaming through the curtains of Vivian's apartment, softly illuminating the room. She was in the kitchen making coffee when Leo came running in, excited. "Mom, Dad said there's a surprise for us today." Vivian turned to him, frowning. "Surprise?" Leo nodded vigorously. "Yes, and Uncle Charles has to go too." Across the table, Charles, who had just finished his coffee, raised an eyebrow, curious. "Well, if it's free food, I'm in." Vivian laughed, but deep down, a chill formed in her stomach. What was Ethan planning? Another dinner again? Across town at Ethan's mansion, he was carefully organizing every detail. He wanted everything to be perfect again, because that night meant so much. He was going to have a new dinner, and he wanted to show Vivian that he was really changing, that he was willing to fight for his family, but without rushing, without demanding. He was also thinking about Charles, who was still dealing with his marriage crisis. Perhaps with a little help, he could give him a chance to fix his own story too. When Vivian, Leo and Charles arrived, the atmosphere was welcoming. The table was elegantly set, and the soft lights set an intimate tone. Vivian looked around in surprise. The smell of home-cooked food wafted through the air, but what really caught her eye was a large mural in the corner of the room. Photos of special moments were there. Leo as a baby in her arms, Ethan and Vivian smiling on an old trip, Charles holding Leo in his early years, and right in the center a handwritten phrase, "Family is where we can always start again." Vivian felt her heart squeeze. Charles looked at Ethan, then at the mural and gave a surprised smile. "You did that?" Ethan nodded, looking directly at Vivian. "I want us to build something new, but at the right time." She looked away, trying to process it. Why was he being like this now? So different from the man she knew. Leo pulled Charles by the arm, anxious. "Uncle, come and see what I have to show you." The two of them went upstairs, laughing, and suddenly Vivian and Ethan were alone in the living room. She crossed her arms, trying to ignore the way her heart beat faster when he looked at her like that. "You've always been good at grand gestures, Ethan. But can you keep it up when there's no audience?" He moved closer, his voice low and sincere. "I know it took me a while to understand what really matters, but now I know, and I'm willing to prove it, one day at a time." Vivian took a deep breath. "What if I can't trust you not to change again?" Ethan gently held her hands. "I'll give you as much time as you need, but I need you to know I've never wanted anything as much in my life as I want to fix it." Her eyes sparkled for a moment, as if a part of her was tempted to believe. But before she could reply, Leo's voice echoed from upstairs. "Mum, Daddy has a surprise for Uncle Charles." She frowned, confused, and exchanged a curious glance with Ethan before going upstairs with him to see what was going on. In Leo's room, Charles was sitting on the bed, watching his nephew enthusiastically explain his inventions. Ethan entered the room and crossed his arms, looking at his brother-in-law. "Charles, there's someone who wants to talk to you." The man frowned, not understanding. Ethan took out his cell phone and made a video call. A blonde woman with light eyes and a hesitant smile appeared on the screen. Emily, Charles's wife. His face changed instantly. "Emily. Yes, I wanted to talk to you." Silence filled the room. Charles was paralyzed, as if he didn't know if it was real. Ethan looked at Vivian and took her hand. "Let's give them a moment." Vivian followed him out of the room, still trying to absorb what was happening. In the living room, she stared at him. "You did this for my brother?" Ethan smiled. "He just needed a push, just like I did." She remained silent, studying him. "I wish I could believe that people change so easily." Ethan moved a little closer. "I didn't change easily, Vivian. I just realized that I was losing everything that really mattered." The air seemed to thicken between them. Ethan touched her face gently. "I'm not going to ask you to decide anything now. But if there's still something between us, I hope that one day you'll tell me." Vivian closed her eyes for a moment. She felt it. She knew. There was love there. There always had been. The past still hurt, but the present showed that perhaps love would always find a way. A short while later, Charles came downstairs with a new smile on his face. "Well, looks like I'll be catching a flight soon." Vivian smiled. Ethan helped fix what looked lost. Charles looked at his ex-brother-in-law, then at his sister. "Maybe he can fix more than that." Vivian looked away for a moment, but then let out a soft laugh and shook her head. Before she could think twice, she stepped forward and hugged Ethan. He stood still for a second, surprised, but then wrapped his arms around her tightly, feeling the warmth of her body against his. It was like coming home after years of being lost. Leo, who was watching everything from the top of the stairs, opened his eyes wide and ran towards his parents, hugging them at the same time, squeezing himself between them. "I knew it," he said excitedly, looking from one to the other. "I knew we were a family." Ethan and Vivian exchanged an emotional look. She touched his face gently, and he held her hand, feeling as if he were holding something too precious to lose again. Without hesitation, Ethan leaned in and kissed her. It was a quiet kiss, full of silent promises, a kiss that said everything that words could never express. Vivian didn't pull back. On the contrary, she surrendered to the moment, because there in his arms, with Leo between them, she realized something she had avoided for a long time. There was still love. And this time, they were ready to make it work. The end. If you like this story, leave a rating from 0 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback is very important for us to keep bringing you exciting stories. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Now click on the video that appears on the screen and continue watching another incredible story.